Welcome back, everybody. When I was, around 20 years old, just imagine yourself walking into an elevator with people who are COVID positive, and you walk in and you don't have a mask, you're not vaccinated. Well, that's how I walked into evangelicalism when I was about 20 years old. And I was indirectly influenced by our guest's father, Francis Schaeffer, who was in many ways behind the scenes, but he certainly affected a lot of older pastors that I was in friendship with. I never felt worthy. Then Frank comes along a generation later, and one of the books that he wrote, the first one that I read, is titled "Crazy for God: How I Grew Up as One of the Elect, Helped Found the Religious Right, and Lived to Take It All or Almost All Back." And that was refreshing. I was already recovering, but it was good to have that boost. His most recent book is Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy. And it is about those very things. I'm going to read it again. Fall in love, have children, stay put, save the planet, be happy. He's a New York Times best-selling author of more than a dozen books. He's a survivor of both polio and evangelical fundamentalist childhood. He's an acclaimed writer who overcame severe dyslexia, homeschooled and self-taught documentary movie director, a feature film director of 4 low-budget Hollywood features Frank has described as pretty terrible. He has been a frequent guest on Rachel Maddow. He has appeared on Oprah, has been interviewed by Terry Gross on NPR's Fresh Air. He's been on the Today Show, BBC News, and many other media outlets. And today we have the privilege of hearing his heart and his story. So join me in welcoming the auspicious Frank Schaeffer.
Well, hi, everybody, and thank you so much, David. Real pleasure to be with you, and I'm glad that I'm here for the whole service, and not just participating by giving a little talk and a Q&A, but really seeing the flavor of your really lovely community and all the people you're with. The song that you introduced, you said something interesting, and that is that it was about power under rather than power over. And I wish I had been part of this service 1.5 years ago before I closed my book out, because I would have quoted you somewhere early in the book and said, if you want to know what Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy is about, this is a good way to sum it up. Power under, I really like this phrase, not power over. The thesis of this new book comes out of an interesting experience that I shared with my wife, Jeannie. I got Jeannie pregnant when we were 17 and 18, and that's 52 years ago, and we have been together ever since, not because we have some special trick on staying married or anything like that, but the luck of the draw. We just happened to be the kind of people who should have been together. If we had waited 100 years, we wouldn't have found anybody better. But, and I'm sorry to, put it this way, but I put it in the book this way. I'm pretty much of a kind of tell it as it is. The way I was raised in an evangelical reformed background was essentially to lord it over women, to have power over everyone around you, or to seek it, and not power under, a kind of inbuilt biblical misogyny. And the way I put it in the book is that I might as well have been raised to be an asshole by divine right, because I was told that men were supposed to be in charge of women, that men were supposed to be disciplinarians of children. Now, there's 2 kinds of moral instruction. One cuts against the grain of your worst instincts. In my case, it's out of toxic masculinity. The other kind of moral teaching helps you find what's better and a better path, and tells you to, as it were, shape up and change the way you are in ways that are difficult. But it doesn't just pat you on the head and stroke you to kind of indulge your worst instincts. So imagine if you were born in a community that taught you from birth that shoplifting was the way to go. And so every time you committed a crime, you're saying to yourself, I'm doing God's will. I know that's a bad analogy and a little bit exaggerated, but that's the way I felt in the early years of my relationship with Jeannie, about kind of making her conform to me, bully her, and so forth. She came from San Francisco. I met her in 1969. She was kind of an original San Francisco hippie princess. She had been to see the Beatles live twice in concert at the Fillmore West and the Cow Palace, and had seen the Stones 3 times. She had been hanging out with one of the guys who would become one of Santana's drummers. And I was this missionary kid living in Switzerland in the L'Abri Fellowship community my parents started in 1954 when I was 2, and by the way, had just had polio and was unable to walk, and would spend the rest of my childhood in a metal leg brace, et cetera, et cetera. But, we came from very, very different backgrounds, and she was visiting L'Abri while traveling around Europe on a Eurail pass, having graduated high school. She was with her sister, Pammy, who was out there having just graduated from Berkeley. And they were supposed to be on a 3-month trip to look at Europe. And they came to my parents' mission, L'Abri Fellowship, in 1969, knowing nothing about it, because Pam had a friend who was staying there. So this gorgeous 18-year-old walks in, and the rest of the story is really my life story. And if you read Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy, you'll get a little of it. But what you really get is the bare bones of what this book is, which is power under, not power over. So here's the story. 13 years ago, my son, John, who had been in the Marine Corps and had 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, came back, went to the University of Chicago, got married, moved in with Jeannie and I. His wife and him fell pregnant within a year. They wanted to have a baby then. This little girl, Lucy, was born in my house, and Jeannie and I wound up as full-time caregivers for 3 grandchildren. I have 5 grandchildren. 2 grew up in Europe and visited, and so forth and so on. And because we had gotten married so young, and our daughter got married fairly young too, her kids were sort of the age of some of my friends' children. And so here I was a grandfather, but 1 generation out of sync with these guys. Well, anyway, these little guys lived across the street, literally in my little town here north of Boston. And I found myself as a full-time caregiver when the oldest one, Lucy, was in school, and her little brother Jack was about 1 year old. And from then on, Jeannie and I were the daycare center and the nannies. And when I say Jeannie and I don't mean Jeannie did the work and I helped a little bit. This was really split down the middle. And then in later years, I became the caregiver because Jeannie had sort of done a lot of that earlier and had a lot of other things she wanted to catch up on. And far from it being a burden, though it was really tiring, what I discovered was that these were literally the best years of my life. And then I kind of wondered at the difference between the quality of caregiving and the way I saw this as such a joyful thing compared to my young fatherhood as a teenager, and then as a 20-something and early 30-something. By the time my kids were growing up, I was so distracted. I was on the road 6 months of the year, first in this sort of bullshit evangelical world of big-time American Christianity, and then in the B-movie business in Hollywood, where I made 4 films. And then later, when I started speaking in universities after a couple of my novels, beginning with Portofino, Saving Grandma, and Zermatt took off, got some good reviews, gave me permission to keep writing. But, as anybody in your congregation knows who's a writer or who has pals who are a writer, writer's income is very iffy. You supplement it with speaking. So I was on the road a lot. So as Jeannie and I were sort of pushing more toward our Social Security years and all the rest of it, this time around, I decided to try to, in this childcare, time of life with grandchildren, do what I had wished I'd been able to do with my own kids. And that was really no multitasking at all. I canceled about 100 speaking engagements over the last 13 years, rather didn't take them when asked. We were pushing into the Social Security years, so we were able to afford it a little better. Jeannie had saved some money, even though I'm terrible at that. She had managed to put some funds aside. So we were able to take these years. And I kept writing. And so I started writing little notes to myself about what I was doing with my grandchildren. And that was the basis of this book. And I have some sciencey kind of friends, a couple of women who teach at university level, neuropsychology and evolutionary biology. And I was sending them bits and pieces about my grandchildren. And they both said, look, there's a book here, but there's a lot of science you need to read, because what you stumbled into in terms of caregiving roles for males actually is the cutting edge of neurobiology right now. Did you know? And then they would tell me, have you read this? Have you read that? Have you read the other? So what was going to be private notes turned into a book, and what was going to be a regular 1.5, 2-year book project turned into 6.5 years, because I had so much reading I had to do, so much homework that these friends of mine gave me, people like Myrna Sheldon Perez, who teaches both women's studies and neurobiology, and is a fantastic person. And I always joke and say, you know, when I'm talking to Myrna Perez, I know how a goldfish in a bowl feels when a human talks to it, because she's so much brighter than I am. And she was kind enough to translate things for me and make sure that what I put on the page in the book actually has some relevance to what's going on. So I owe a lot to these folks, and I thank them in the book for helping me out in a pretty full acknowledgement section. So anyway, the book has 3 threads. One is what I was doing with my grandchildren that opened the door to wondering what male caregiving is about, that opened the door to this. And here's the crux of it, this power under, not power over. It turns out that one of the things that evolutionary biology had been assuming for decades, in a kind of a misrepresentation of Darwin that was then used by slave traders, plantation owners, this sort of idea of the survival of the fittest. Actually, it was never the survival of the fittest. Evolutionary biology is very clear. It's always been, and please pay attention to this one, it's the survival of the friendliest. It is the fact that human beings cooperate together, that in spite of the slave trade, in spite of Holocaust, in spite of evil, misogyny, rape, and pillage, there's a whole other side to the human race, which is represented here today in this church community with David as pastor, and that is cooperation. And essentially, if you study evolution and evolutionary biology, you understand that the only reason we're here today in this congregation, all of us, the 27 of us who are here together today with Pastor David, is this, and that is somewhere in your ancestry and mine, we all share something. And there's no way around this. Somebody cared when they didn't have to, and that's the only reason you're here today. I'm not here talking to you unless 10, 15,000, 110,000 years ago on a trail somewhere, a child was left. Either the mother had been killed by a wild animal or a marauding band or something. Somebody picked that child up and took it back, and they didn't enslave it, and they didn't kill it, and they didn't eat it. They raised it with love and care, which was the only reason this child survived. And that happens in every single genealogical path that you can imagine in the human race. That's unavoidable. Someone cared. So when you look at the path that I talk about in Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy, it's not asking everybody to fall in love as a white heterosexual male who gets a girl pregnant and they have children and everything's fine. It's fall in love with love itself as the operating parameter of your life. And that changes everything, because then you have children. And today, by the way, and I'm not being cute here, Pastor David is my father today, and he's my mother today. Why? Because he's invited me to meet his friends, and that's you listening to me, the same way a mother puts a drawing up on her refrigerator with magnets that her little kid did a few minutes ago and says, hey, look at what Jimmy made. Jimmy, that's great. Look, I'm going to show everybody. I'm going to put it up. He's giving me a chance to share my heart with you and my new book. And this is what parenting is. So when I say have children, I don't just mean my 3 kids, Jessica, Francis, and John, or my grandchildren, Lucy, Ben, and Nora, and Jack, and all the rest. I mean have children in the sense that your church is my parent today, because you're allowing me a moment to shine and to express myself. That's what caregiving is. Stay put, and that is don't wander around all over the planet, physically or spiritually, looking for something better. The grass is never greener on the other side of the fence. You know why? Because you're still there and you were the problem anyway. And so stay put is not just physically, it's good to put roots down and know your neighbors and exchange greetings with them and be kind and so forth. It's not have this idea that somehow life is this competition to always get to something better. Oh, I've met a girl I really love. I've met a man I really love, whoever. I've met a non-binary person I feel close to, but maybe I can find somebody else. You know, I worked in Hollywood for a while, and one of the sicknesses of Hollywood parties is no one's ever looking at you. They're always looking over your shoulder to see if there's somebody more important in the room that they can make a beeline to for an even better connection than you. And it doesn't matter who you are, there's always somebody more important. So if you can't stay put in your mentality of focusing on what's right in front of you, then you always live life as if it is a stepping stone to something better. Sorry, folks, what I learned and what I put in this book, there is no better. There's only this minute. So if you're looking at your watch saying, well, I've gotten something important later, and whatever it may be, and that's your mentality through life, you never see anything in front of you. It's like flying over the globe at 33,000 feet instead of ever taking a walk in the woods. You're not seeing a thing. Save the planet is a function of having done those other things. Fall in love with love itself. Look at everyone around you as your child in a caregiving relationship. Stay put. In other words, do not be distracted by the next great thing. Stick with what's right in front of you and understand that moment is all you've got. Save the planet, because when you're in love with love itself and you're regarding the rest of the human race as your child, and you're staying put in the way of putting that ambition to bed for a while and looking at what's right in front of you, you save the planet by virtue of the fact you're not trying to consume as a way to find satisfaction in life. You know, I'll give you an analogy. You're not the three guys on the jet ski tearing up the coastline and bothering everybody. You're the mother sitting on the beach breastfeeding a child. You are part of the environment in a completely different way than a consumer. And then, you know, be happy really is the wrong words. I should have said find joy, because happiness sounds like you're working for it. So the ultimate lesson of this book is the more you try to be happy, the less happy you will be, because the way we try to find happiness is through consumption, position, and power over others. You know, you go to something and you meet someone and they don't say, who are you? They say, what do you do? You are defined by your career. And that applies to males and females and non-binary people alike. We all want to know what somebody does. And of course, the only real question is who are you? So, you know, I have a podcast, by the way, that you're free to listen to if you don't get tired of my voice right now. And that is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. And we do about 2 guests a week. And they all tell me after the conversation that it's a really different conversation than they expected, because I've had some famous Representative Ted Lieu of California, Congressman. You know, I've had him on twice, and Moby, the former rock musician, star, film score, and all these people. They tell me after my conversations, hey, you know, you were 45 minutes into the talk before you asked me about anything I had done. I want to know about their mom. I want to know about their dad. I want to know who they love. I want to know, you know, do they work with their hands? Not because it's shtick, but that's how I hope you take me today. I hope you don't look at me as an author. I hope you look at me as a grandfather. I hope you look at me as somebody who was with Jeannie and learned from her patience and forbearance and kindness that she stuck with my damaged former fundamentalist self and saved me and stuck around long enough to lift me out of that world. So the plea the book makes is really simple, and then I'm going to throw this open for questions in a minute. And that is, how do you define yourself? But much more important, the book asks you to redefine your idea of success. If you define success the way corporate America defines success, Western capitalism defines success, if you define it that way, then you are looking to your career and your job title to give you a sense of self-worth. But if you define success the way that actually leads to joy, and I'm not talking about because it's what Jesus said or Gandhi said or Martin Luther King said or some wonderful thing or pious saying or Mother Teresa said, I'm talking about hard science. Evolutionary biology tells you one thing. We all evolved as caregivers. We all evolved to cooperate. And therefore, if you are looking for power over others rather than power under, then you basically are defining yourself this way. You're saying success is my job title. Success is what I earn. Success is my position of power. If you define it the way evolution, I didn't say Jesus, evolution defines it. It's totally different. The quality of your ability to cooperate with others is why the human race has survived, in spite of, now fill in the blank of all the evil things. But what has predominated is the ability to cooperate together. If you define success that way, then for me, for instance, I'm not bullshitting or being cute when I say, and someone says, what do you do? And I'm not cute by answering, I'm a full-time grandfather caregiver. That's not being like, oh yeah, but what do you really do? No, 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 sorry guys, that's what I really do. The footnote is the writing career. And I haven't made an intellectual decision. That's an actual spiritual switch in my life, which is what my book is about. How does this ambitious, asshole by divine right get to a point where in his life, he sincerely, actually, seriously interrupts his writing every morning. I get up at 3 a.m. to write every day, but I have a more important activity, and that is with my second cup of coffee. I clean the kitchen, do all the dishes. I happen to do all the cooking in our house because that's my love, is cooking. We don't eat out much. Well, why do I do the dishes? Because Jeannie came to me with some post-feminist contract and said, I'm kicking you out unless you do your share of the housework? No, because I genuinely have discovered something in life. And that is my fastest route to happiness is to see joy in my wife's face and eyes and unconditional trust and love. That's selfish. It's what I would call informed selfishness. Stupid selfishness says, how little can I get away from doing for this other person? Informed selfishness says, I'll listen to those studies that say, if you give something to someone, it is far more satisfying than if you get something. They've done these things where someone saves up and they've always wanted a Mercedes SL 300 antique car and they finally get one. Well, science has measured that and found that, maybe that happiness kick lasts for a week to 10 days. But if you're in a supermarket line and the woman in front of you does not have the money to buy the groceries she's taken off the shelf, and you step forward and pay, if you have the money that day, for that basket of groceries, you can recall that in the midst of a depression and terrible dark moment of the kind I suffer from still from time to time, plunged into despair. I don't think back and say, yeah, but shit, I should be happy now. I got that new, whatever it is, 6 months ago. And, I've always wanted one. No, if you really want to find joy and even fix your own depression, sometimes recall the last time you really did something for someone. And if you can't, then go out and do something generous. And you will find, weirdly enough, it will actually turn your mood around. So being happy depends on not trying to be happy, but trying to actually bring joy to other people. Because when you do that, whether it's in a romantic relationship or the people you work with, then you're in tune with something much bigger. So the book essentially argues through storytelling and through the studies I did and through the conclusions I've drawn, and most of all through my own failures. This book does not say, hey, look at me. This book says, look at me and tremble. Here's the time I wasted. Here's the stupidity of me. Here's the anger and where it got me. Now I have learned something. May I please share that with you? Don't define yourself by career. Define yourself by what you see written in the eyes of those who love you and trust you. And what you see there is actually the true mirror of yourself. That's who you are. No matter what you say you are, that's who you are. What you see written in the eyes of the people that you care for. So that's what my book is about. And if you buy the book or get it or whatever and like it, I'm a working author and I appreciate your support and your help. I ask for your help. You are my parent today. I'm not coming to you as some big author or little author that you've heard of or not heard of. I'm just coming to you as today, your child. And I'm saying to you, here's this 70-year-old grandfather asking for help and saying, no, today I'm your child. You are my caregivers. Thank you for your love and care. And with that, I'll throw it open to any Q&A. If you have any questions, you know the process here better than me. I'm going to leave myself unmuted, but if you want to unmute or raise your hand or whatever it might be, please just fire away and I'll be glad to answer questions for as long as Pastor David keeps the door open here, and then we'll move on.
I was thinking you probably wanted, when you were saying something about your book at the end there, the promo part, you probably want us to go on to booksellers and to the comments, the reviews section.
Yeah, it would be great if you'd buy a copy from Amazon and give it a good review. You know, I like local bookstores better, but the truth of the matter is it's such a weird world we live in. Local bookstores don't stock books unless they see good Amazon numbers. I mean, it's crazy. It's a catch, you know, I mean, it's just all backwards, but there it is. So you can help me by giving it a good review.
And I've already done that, by the way.
I appreciate that. Speaking of parenting me. Thanks, Mom.
This was artistically beautiful, Frank. And you are an artist, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that in the intro, but
yeah, you see a big old book cover hanging behind me promoting my book, but on either side are paintings by me.
I'm curious, and of course, anybody else, if you want to weigh in, you're welcome to do it. But I'm just curious if churches ever invite you.
The churches that used to invite me never do. You know, it has to be somebody weird and wonderful like you guys. In other words, I like the Church of the Rejected. Then I show up. But you know, I had that, a lot of those, you know, hey, you're looking at a guy who at age 22 was the keynote speaker to the Southern Baptist Convention, 23,000 pastors and acres and acres of polyester double stitch suits. Those fashions in the 70s were objectively horrible. But anyway, yeah, so no, not so much anymore. The college speaking thing I've done a lot of. And as I said, with this full-time stuff, now Nora's in school. She's 7.5. I do school pickups every day at 3, cook for her, read to her, take care of her till around 6:30 every evening. But other than that, that's winding down. But I see them quite a bit still. But no, not so much these days.
Well, thank you for that. You've parented me, because all the churches that used to invite me don't invite me either. Right. So I appreciate that. Clint, what were you going to say?
I just want to say I appreciate so much how you expressed being. Just being. The grass is greener where you water it, not where, you know what I mean? And that was a perfect message. I'm gonna get the book now. I ran off to go. My better half is not feeling well, and so I sat there and I ran off and I had to go tell her, this dude's genius. He's expressing so well how we're looking somewhere else instead of being just right where we're at, and then being grateful for that, and really soaking it in, because the great memories you have is if you were present at the time of those memories, then the memories are really in 3D.
Exactly. Yeah. How is she okay, Clint, or he okay?
She's all right, but she's just not feeling well. And when she's not feeling well, I made toast for her. You know what I mean? And so you're right though, when you do those little things, like, you know what? I'm at the store the other day, and as I'm coming home, I had to grab me. I was gonna grab a soda. And then I said, there's a little teddy bear right there. And it says, I love you on it. And I said, oh, you know what? That'd be a nice surprise. So I grabbed the little teddy bear.
There you go.
It's not, Valentine's Day isn't once a day. It's every day, as long as you're in love with life and you're in love with your partner. And then to give that joy, to see that unexpected, here you go. That's living life.
Exactly. Well put.
Clint, we need to get you on the college speaking circuit. Thank you so much, Frank, for joining us today. My question is around kind of niceness and how we have kind of, I really appreciate the conversation on power under instead of power over. I talk that a lot of times in the work that I do. And, but how do we, in the conversation of power, not forget that like niceness can be used as a tool of power over. And so how do we really address the systems, white supremacy, colonialism, all those big systems that really kind of play off that niceness, and not just be like, oh yeah, go do a nice thing and you've done your part, but we really need to really address these big systems of power that uphold the power over. And so how do we continue to press into that work?
Well, if you read the book, you'll find that the book has a lot of how-to in it. It's not a how-to book, but I get into very specific things in the book, even to the point of bulleted lists of things we need to do. But it boils down to redefining success. And so let's just give one example. And this is not a how-to answer to your full question, but just sort of easing in from the sideways. Think of the ridiculousness of living at a time in history when, on the one hand, we tell women they have full equality, get into the workplace, smash the glass ceiling, but you're going to do it on terms that were created by men in the 1930s and 40s, i.e., if you want a family, you're going to have to wait so long that you're going to be encouraged to freeze your eggs because the corporate world is so anti-family and so anti-human experience. And this applies, by the way, to men too. I have a whole chapter in my book about feminism being better for men than it is for women so far, and go through all the actuarial tables, how men who live in places like Finland and Switzerland and Iceland now live as long as women do in countries where there's more gender equality. But you know, when you look at, for instance, how the family is minimized all across the board, I mean, think of the crap that Pete Buttigieg got for taking some time with his adopted children. One of the ways we're going to address this is say, listen, we are not going to play by these rules anymore. We are going to recalibrate feminism, and we are going to recalibrate gay rights, and we are going to recalibrate room for non-binary people. And yes, white heterosexual grandfathers too, and Black Americans and everybody else. It cannot only be according to this one social model of white heterosexual industrial leaders that has never changed. So it's always the glass ceiling is break into the corporate world, but do it their way. My daughter happens to be a CEO of a small company in New York City. And I quote her in my book as telling me that until COVID came along, she would have meetings with bankers and other people where she'd have no idea what their life was about, and they would have no idea about hers. And then all of a sudden, COVID, they're home, and the banker she's talking to is whispering and saying, I'm sorry, we got to talk quietly. I just put my toddler down for a nap. Well, up till that moment, he's never even admitted he has any other interest except professional. And the number of women who lie about their professions in the sense that they're on the way to a school pickup and they're pretending they're in their office, because if they even admit they have a family, somehow that's a strike against them. Or the guys who are given paternity leave by, say, a more forward-thinking corporation, they don't take it because they think it's going to be bad for their career. Or the women who say, we wish the men would take paternity leave as a cover for us taking maternity leave. Everywhere you look at it, in terms of your how-to, our culture is geared to profit. It is shareholder profits. And that runs across the board, and it cuts into everything. It cuts into racial issues, gender issues, diversity issues. Everything is always from the point of view, okay, how does this fit with corporate America? One of the ways that corporate America, I guess, continues with the patriarchy and all the rest of it is through those means of everything is about profit. So after COVID, you have the great refusal, people refusing to go along, come back to work. They want to have more time with their families. That's kind of the beginning of a rumble of something changing that will then have a real impact on what you're talking about. Because look, if you start seeing the people as most important in your life, you begin to wake up to the fact you're in a community. And if you wake up to the community because you want it to be good for the people in your life, in other words, these kids and grandchildren or your partner or spouse, then you're more involved. And so I think the road to bringing some change is to shift our focus on the priorities of profit and the priorities of what was a male preserve of power that now is grudgingly shared with some females, grudgingly shared with more people of color, but it's always you play by our rules. And I think we need to begin to say, we want a new rule book. And that rule book is going to put the relationships in our life first. Just take one example. We are going to demand a minimum wage that means no one has to work 2 or 3 jobs. We are going to demand maternity and paternity leave. No, not for a few weeks, for a year, all expenses paid for males and females, non-binary people alike. So no woman ever has to go back to work at 3 low-paying jobs while she's still bleeding from a C-section she had last week because she doesn't have any coverage. So the amazing thing is, if you put this idea of actual pro-family politics, not the fake right-wing bullshit I was selling in the 70s or that Fox News is about today, but actual pro-family, real pro-family, which means pro-choices for women, etc. At the heart of things, it has an amazing effect on a lot of other areas that are not directly related. Because a culture, let's say, that is geared towards that is not the culture that is as brutal as ours. It's the culture, for instance, on gun policy that would have a completely different way of looking at things. Hey, just ask a question. Is this good for families? No. You know, when you think of the number of suicides, you know, with handguns and child fatalities, there's a lot of intersections in this "what are your priorities" question that at first don't seem related, but I think are very, very, very related. And we need to shake it all up and you know, toss the cards again, as it were, play a completely different hand. We can't keep trying to adjust the male white oligarchy's rules set in cement and oh, please, master, let me in. This has got to stop. And it has to stop for women. It has to stop for people of color. It has to stop for all minorities. It certainly has to stop for the gay and non-binary communities. Look, you know, we have to shake this up and come up with a new set of rules. And my book really talks about that very, very specifically. So I can't go through all the lists here. We don't have the time, but they really are in the book.
Frank, Kenichi here. Thank you so much. I wanted to kind of build on what you were saying. As you were talking about the preservation of humanity, the care, and things are rumbling, systems are shaking, and we need to have a new playbook. I'm wondering what, based on your observation, the fact that so many Americans perished during the past 2 years of COVID. You know, I was just talking with my wife earlier. I said, if America does not approach this in a different way, another pandemic will hit and we will go through the same situation when many people will perish. So it's from my perspective, it's diametrically opposed to what you are putting forth in your writing and you know what you are saying. Please hear, based on my my life experience and what I've learned. I just want to, I know that there's a whole lot of things that are there, but just wanted to get maybe a thought from you about this.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Kamichi. And the thing is, I don't want to sound too judgmental about this, but you'll notice that as long as it's elderly people who are out of the marketplace and no longer, quote, contributing to gross national product who are perishing, it's not such a big deal. When you have a whole class of people who are expendable, be that incarcerated Black males or people who are no longer being productive, it is another sign that you are judging individual human worth by their capability to contribute to the gross national product, which means you are defined by your job title. So the guy locked up for the lifetime for a minor drug offense or 3 strikes and you're out, his real crime was that he was not on the board of General Motors. And then he could have done whatever he wanted and hired the best lawyers, and he wouldn't be doing a 25-year sentence in some Louisiana hellhole. And so when you come to COVID and you realize that it at first, totally disproportionately felled the elderly and many times the marginalized who had not received good health care and who had other problems and were, and so forth. Hey, what chance did they have? Let's talk about your average diabetic when we're living in the only Western democracy that doesn't make sure that, first of all, healthcare is universal and free. And secondly, when it comes to medications, allows the price of something like insulin to be jacked up 5, 10, 15 times more than our compatible countries in the European social democracies. So the problem, COVID just simply put a magnifying glass on the fact that we are not pro-life in the true sense. That's all fake. We're just anti-woman and misogynistic. And we're certainly not pro-family. We could care less about families, or we would have paid parental leave and nobody would be working 3 jobs trying to support a child that doesn't have care and is just left with a neighbor down the street because there's no provision made. And if they pour scalding water over them, tough. They're not from the performing, delivering part of our culture. We do the same thing with our policy on guns. We don't care about human life, pro-life, or there wouldn't be 36,000 in some years and up to 40, 50,000 in other years gun deaths in America. we wouldn't live in a culture in which there are more police officers who take their own life with their handgun than die in the line of duty by far. So, all COVID did was basically, it was like we got a cosmic timeout. My book calls for taking time and deciding what you really value in life. And it was really weird while I was writing my book. I had to go through and rewrite it because it's so odd. It's as if I was calling for a social experiment on a grand scale that I never believed would happen. Lo and behold, it did happen. And that is COVID sent everybody home for an adult timeout saying, hey, you've screwed everything up. Take some time, look at your planet. The jet trails were gone again, like after 9/11. Pollution was reduced so much in mainland China and the US and India and other places, you could see it from outer space. COVID forced the human race to actually take a long, hard look and say, what do you really value? You all go home now. You've screwed things up. Don't want to see you again for a year. You can come out of your room a year from now. And I'm not being facetious. I had friends who died of COVID. But it's weird that actually happened. So now we're trying to sort of rebuild from that time out. Here's the big question. Are we going to come back having learned something or not? So your question is very, very germane and to the point. And the issue will be, have we learned something or not? It's only the old people who are dying. It's only people with expensive pre-existing conditions. Who cares about them anyway? It's only Black mothers who have a high morbidity rate compared to white middle-class women. So who cares? This mentality just rolls forward and rolls forward and rolls forward. And COVID shouts, sorry, guys, you're all in this together, because whatever happens to the least of these is going to happen to all of you if you're not careful. And that's the implication, and it will. So we're either going to start thinking as a community, caregivers, what I call for in my book, of each other, where we fall in love with love itself, where we stay put, where we save the planet, or there'll be hell to pay. And COVID is just a warning shot. Mother Nature does not like to be fooled with. And just remember again, we evolved as caregivers. When we stop behaving as caregivers, as our brother's keeper, you're going to get punished. You're not getting punished by an angry God. You're getting punished by Mother Nature. And she doesn't mess around. And the punishment is always fatal. So when we look at whole communities that went extinct at some point, or when we look at, which strains of the human species made it through the evolutionary process, Cro-Magnon man, all this other stuff, there's a reason that those of us who are here are still here. It's because not everybody through all evolutionary history behaved as selfishly as we're now behaving. And either we get back with the program or not, or we're going to pay. And I don't prophesy in any sense about what that payment may be, but COVID is certainly a warning shot right across the bows of all our enterprises and our efforts and everything we're so pleased with. So I take your point.
Frank, I really appreciate the gift that you are to humanity, and that you are to us today. I can't believe that I waited so long to try to schedule you, knowing that we were going to have these limitations and opportunities. I thank you for reaching out to me some years ago. I told a bit of my story in Huffington Post, and you got in touch with me to see if you could post it on your blog. Mm-hmm. And I just we had a beautiful phone conversation right around that time. I can't figure out why I didn't call on you much earlier, because you've been, a powerful presence among us, helping us with our homecoming, because that's what it's all about, homecoming, right? And that's what you're helping us with. I feel helped by your voice in your life today. And I don't think I'm alone in that. And so your remarks, okay, we'll take one more. Catherine's hand is up, and but it's time for us to have communion.
I just wanted to say thank you. And also, I love this fresh perspective, but also what you're sharing with your grandchildren you're tending. I mean, this that is legacy in the truest sense of making a difference. So I think that a lot of us underplay what that caring does, and especially in the way that you're so present and loving. And as a grandparent, what a gift. And all grandparents, parents sometimes don't have the time because they're, in the trenches of funding the family. But so thank you so much for that. And may many people read your book. I'll definitely get it and be so inspired to be caretakers and to celebrate the ability to, and that is significant. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the kind comment. And I would just say the reason why caregiving is denigrated in this culture is because it goes back to this idea that somehow it's a feminine activity. Whereas when you study evolutionary biology and you do some of the reading I quote in my book, you find out, lo and behold, that research by people like Dr. Feldman has proved in studying hormonal changes, brain chemistry, and brain scans that, for instance, a gay adoptive couple, the person in that relationship that bonds most with the child, their brain activity and measurement mirrors and is identical to a mother with a newborn baby. It has nothing to do with gender or even the biological relationship of parent-child. Males also evolved as caregivers. I mean, we all know it takes a village. Well, who's in the village? It's never just moms. And so the idea that it's unusual for a grandfather to take 13 years and help raise his grandchildren, it only comes about in a culture that sees all caregiving as a lesser activity. All I got to ask you is, what do we pay our teachers? What's the training and the salary of really good preschool teachers compared to, say, lawyers on Wall Street? You just have to ask what do we really value? And it's not caregiving. And so it's part of the misogyny that we live in. It's part of the sexism we live in that then extends to males. So it's like, you're only, what? I thought you were a novelist. You're only taking care of kids now? What's that? This is not a prestige activity. But here's the crazy thing. And that is, it's also the one in which I personally, and I know other people have shared this with me, have found the most joy. So the stupid thing is we devalue the one thing that is guaranteed to bring the most joy in life, which is not buying a place in Florida. It's not getting a new car. It's not that new shiny thing, whatever that thing is. In my case, it's Nora, who 2 nights ago, I'm walking her back home after school, and I'll end here so you can do communion. And she had her school pack. I said, okay, I'll carry that for you. And she said, no, I want to carry my stuff. And she had a bag from school. And then I watched her put the pack on and shift the bag around, because I've also got the dog in another hand, and organize everything. Why? So she could put her little hand up and hold mine. I've never had to take Nora's hand, ever. I've never reached down to take her hand in the 7.5 years I've cared for her from birth. But if she's anywhere near me, she puts her hand up and takes mine. Okay, I know this sounds very Oprah-esque and maudlin, but I want to tell you something. I've won some awards and I've gotten some things in life. I'm not a big success. I'm a working author, that's all, who managed to scrape a living out. That said, I've had some moments. There is nothing in my life that affirms me as a human being that this little 7.5-year-old girl arranges her bag, the thing she's carrying, the leash she's got in another hand. Also, she can find her most comfortable spot on this earth where she feels safest. And that is walking next to her grandfather, putting her hand up to take mine. And if anybody ever asked me, what is the meaning of life? That's it. The connection at that moment, the trust that I've earned, is worth more than anything else I can put together. So, when people say to me, oh, it's great for your children that you're doing this caregiving, as if I'm giving them a favor, inside, part of me is laughing and saying, if you only knew, this is the only reason someone